Hi everyone. Instead of being in class with you today, I'm in Chicago, Illinois. So I'll be presenting via video. The article that I'm going to start off with was called Wanted, A Logical Cuba Policy by Wayne S. Smith. I'm David Cortez, and I'll be presenting the information to you. As we have all come to understand over the course of our readings, U.S. policy towards Cuba has been counterproductive to say the least. Essentially, what we have seen throughout the last 50 years, and most importantly in the 20 to 25 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, is nothing more than hardline posturing which has produced zero results. As much as it pains U.S. foreign policymakers, we have been utterly unsuccessful in our attempts to bring Castro's Cuba to our feet. Yet we continue policies which are destructive, not only in respect to living conditions in Cuba, but to our relationships around the world. An interesting thought raised by Wayne Smith is, if Cuba had a population over 100 million people, would there be an embargo? Still, saber-rattling and chest-puffing continues to be more important to the U.S. than strengthening relations with one of our closest neighbors. So why not Cuba? Why can't we put aside our principled stands and freedom speeches to open, at the very least, lines of communication devoid of aggressive tones? Certainly, it could be said that the United States is completely hypocritical. China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Saudi Arabia are all countries the U.S. engages with, openly praises even. But these countries are no more little d democratic than Cuba. We also, as a nation, claim to care so much about the defense of human rights, yet Saudi Arabia boasts one of the worst records in respect to the violent oppression of women. Ultimately, the what can you do for us attitude of the U.S. has kept us from normalizing relations with Cuba because we don't see clearly defined interests on the island. But, as Wayne Smith explores in this article, U.S. interests are plentiful and cannot be ignored. The first of these interests is no massive flow of refugees. Initially, our stance towards Cuba was strictly based on national security. Cold War mentality ultimately shifted into a position of anti-immigration. While it is our goal to keep Cuban people in Cuba the same way we like other Caribbean countries to stay, we cannot deny the contradictions between our goals and our policies. But without any kind of open communication between our two nations, we cannot ensure that Castro will not open the emigration floodgates due to deteriorating conditions on the island, such as economic distress within the population. So here's the kicker. We continue an anti-immigration policy in the Helms-Burton Act, stating that we will waste taxpayer money to scoop up refugees and send them back to Cuba, while at the same time continuing the embargo, which sharply increases economic distress on the island, as Smith says, choking it to its knees. The second major U.S. interest in Cuba is the interdiction of drugs. This one is very simple. Cuba lies directly in line with one of the main drug routes from South America, so a collaborative effort between the U.S. and Cuba to thwart drug trafficking would not only be ideal, but truly effective. Still, the U.S. has no interdiction agreement with Cuba. The third U.S. interest in Cuba is the advancement of human rights. While our record for supporting human rights around the world has not necessarily been stellar, this is indeed a noble cause, and one the U.S. should care about. The more open communication and free exchange of ideas that happens between the U.S. and Cuba, the more light shed on the island nation, bringing human rights violations to the forefront, where they can be addressed and eradicated. Elizardo Sanchez, Cuba's leading human rights activist, says plainly, if you want to let some light shine into the island, then don't keep trying to keep all the windows shut. He goes on to say, the more American citizens on the streets of Cuban cities, the better for the cause of a more open system. Yet, we continue to limit travel and continue to ignore the pleas of Cuban activists who wish for more American presence on the island. For the sake of human rights. Really, what does this say of us? The fourth interest, which one might imagine would be the most alluring, are the economic benefits that are to be had in normalizing relations with Cuba. It was said at one point the U.S. stood to trade between $3 and $7 billion a year if the embargo was lifted, thanks to the inevitable commercialization of the island. But this is a figure of the past. In the time the U.S. has spent posturing, European and Canadian investments have found their way into Cuba, reaping economic benefits the U.S. very well could have enjoyed. Another side to this interest is the economic benefits that are left to be seen from compensation for properties lost during the Revolution. Although this interest is small, some $2 billion worth of properties were nationalized by the Cuban government and could be compensated, a clear economic benefit for the U.S. Ultimately, though, American investors can only stand on the sidelines for so long. As international competitors do well in Cuba, normalization seems inevitable, in that it would be beneficial for the multiplicity of investors. The fifth U.S. interest in Cuba is more of a worldwide interest, and that is the limitation of conflicts with third countries. While Cuba may not be valuable to the U.S., and continuing to isolate the island might be satisfying for American foreign policy makers, we have not been mindful of the tensions our treatment of Cuba has created with other nations of the world. With the Helms-Burton Act's provision allowing for lawsuits against countries who do business in Cuba, the European Union has filed a formal protest against the U.S. and the World Trade Organization. These kinds of tensions undoubtedly could have lasting consequences, leading to the deterioration of relationships which, as of right now, are in good standing. But how long can they last that way? The question we have to ask ourselves is, are foreign relationships more important than continuing policies built on little more than spite? The sixth U.S. interest in Cuba is a peaceful transitional process. At this point, we have done nothing but guarantee the continuation of poor relations between the two nations. Essentially, the U.S. has openly stated that their goal is a Cuba without Castro, which would, as policymakers see it, provide an open road for the U.S. to insert itself into a leadership position, a Machiavellian attempt to hold on to power by any means necessary. Although, reality is, we cannot control every aspect of the issue, and as Wayne Smith says, we should be prepared to improve relations with or without Castro. This is the only way we can move forward, and the sooner we learn this, the better off we, both nations, will be. The next step is up to us. Do we continue down the road we've been paving for half a century, or do we change our course? Our current methods have done nothing to break the will of the revolution or to make us as a nation better off. We must recognize this and decide whether our current policies are necessary and what kinds of options we could explore next. I provided 2 questions here that you all might want to discuss in my absence. What do we have to lose by normalizing relations between the U.S. and Cuba today? And where do we begin the process of tearing down the walls? I hope you've enjoyed my presentation today. See you soon. Goodbye.